First of all, I would like to thank Chakrapani Garu for giving me this opportunity. It's my honor to introduce Balasubramanian Garu, who serves as Secretary and Treasurer of Renewable Energy Action Forum, Cherry Bangalore. Mr. Balasubramanian Garu serves as Managing Director of Karnataka Power Corporation, Chairman and Managing Director of Mysore Sugar Company, Karnataka Electric Factory, National Textile Corporation, Revenue Commissioner, and Additional Chief Secretary and Resident Commissioner of Karnataka Government in New Delhi. He served as the Additional Chief Secretary, Government of Karnataka, GOK. He served as Director of Asia of International Energy Initiatives. He has a great amount of experience at the highest levels of administration and the government, and also the experience he has gained in the technical fields of renewable energy and also the power on the boards of SMIORE. During his 36-year tenure from 1965 to 2001 in the Indian Administrative Service, he held various important positions including Deputy Commissioner, Collector, and District Magistrate in the districts of Shimoga, Gulbarga, and Bangalore, Director of Sericulture in Karnataka, Chairman and Administration of Upper Krishna Project, Divisional Commissioner of Gulbarga Division, Secretary to Chief Minister when Sri Ramakrishna Hegde Garu was the CM, Secretary to Central Silk Board, Joint Secretary in Ministry of Textiles. He retired from IAS in April 2001. He has been a non-executive and independent director of the Santuru Manganese and Iron Ores Limited since November 3, 2010. He serves as a director on the boards of many companies as a nominee of Indian Renewable Energy Development Agency. He serves as the chairman of Biodiesel Society of India and International Cellulose Alliance and Task Force for Recovery and Protection of Government Lands (GOK).
China's Belt and Road Initiative, the economic, social, and defense implications for India. This is a topical subject now, and we'll be hearing about this more and more in days to come. Now, this is a map showing China, India, and the neighboring countries. As you can see there, India has got about 4,000 and odd kilometers of border with China and 3,300 kilometers with Pakistan. We also have large extent of border with Nepal, Bangladesh, and Myanmar, but we don't have any so far any big problems with them, especially with China. Therefore, I have shown here the of border with China because borders with China is one of the longest, 4,000 and odd, as you can see there in the map. Now we see the Silk Road is a very old is the first international trade route as old as 2nd century before the Common Era, and it refers to the land routes of China with Southeast Asia, South Asia, Persia. Persia is Iran. Till 1935, Persia, India, I mean, Iran was called Persia. After that, they call it Iran. And the Arabian Peninsula, East Africa, all these things were connected by this Silk Road, both by land route as well as by maritime road, that is by sea route also. China also constructed the Great Wall of China in the 5th century onwards, till about 17th century for about 1,200 years to protect themselves from Mongolians as well as to protect the Silk Road. Now on the Silk Road, Buddhism, Ashoka's time, Buddhism spread towards the east on the Silk Road, both on the maritime route as well as on the Silk Road. The most important thing is Marco Polo, who was an Italian from Venice. He had gone to China and he lived in China for 17 years during the time of Kublai Khan, as I'll be explaining a little more. Now, this is the old Marco Polo's Silk Route. This is not a very clear map. This is a very old map. As you can see there, this land route. This is the land route from Venice and all the way to Beijing. And the sea route is this. The most important thing is the sea route touched Calicut also. Calicut was an important port in those days. And he had touched, he had dropped, he has stopped in this Calicut also for some time, Marco Polo, and then went back to Venice. So this is the old Marco Polo's Silk Route, which he made famous. Now, this is the map of Genghis Khan, who was a very important conqueror in the olden days. As you can see there, his was the biggest empire, a land empire in the world in those days. He had gone up to Eastern Europe, that is today's Hungary and all that, and then came up to Afghanistan, Iraq, and all that. He did not come into India. He just stopped at the outskirts of India with Kabul and a place called Ghazni in Afghanistan and today's Pakistan areas. But he did not come to India. His grandson was Kublai Khan, who had conquered China. You see, China is one country which was never colonized by the British or any European power. The only power which conquered China was this Kublai Khan, who was the grandson of Genghis Khan. After that, China had never been conquered by any other country. It was never colonized by any other country except for a brief period, some areas like Manchuria by Japan just before the Second World War in 1930s. They had occupied Manchuria. Apart from that, they had never been colonized by anybody. Now, this is the Silk Route as on today maintained by China. As you can see there, these are all hilly areas. There are lots of hills and deserts and all that. It goes via Himalayan tracks and all that. These are the hilly areas, as you can see. This is another view of the Silk Road as maintained today by China. These also all hilly tracks. It also goes through the Silk Road also goes through the deserts. This is called, see, China is full of deserts. Two deserts are there, Gobi Desert and Taklamakan Desert. This is Taklamakan Desert. And Taklamakan means, Taklamakan is somewhere near Kyrgyzstan area and then this Turkmenistan area, border of China and this Central Islamic, former ex-Soviet Islamic republics. And Taklamakan means one way in, no way out. That's what they mean by Taklamakan. And as you can see there, they go in long caravans, defending themselves against people like robbers and thieves and pirates and all that. Now, this is another view of the Silk Road going through these winter areas. It's all full of snow. And these camels are what we call the double humped camel instead of the single humped camels. And it's full of merchandise. And this is how they were going. And this is a part of the Great Wall of China, which was constructed both to defend themselves against the Mongols, who were the greatest warriors in those days, as well as to protect the Silk Road. This Great Wall of China was constructed. I'll show you a few good pictures about this Great Wall of China. Now, this is a view of the Great Wall of China. As you can see there, this is completely fortified and very long. Now, this is another view of the Great Wall of China. Great Wall is actually 21,000 kilometers in length. It was constructed over a period of about 600, 700 years by various dynasties. And the average width of this wall is about 21 feet and a height of about 16 feet, excluding these towers which you find there. And over a period of that long years, about 18 lakh workers were employed to construct these Great Wall of China. Now, this is a part of Great Wall which many of the tourists are taken. I had the opportunity to go to China twice, and once I went to this Great Wall in this particular area. As you can see there, this is a very steep area. In this area, you'll find it's very steep. Now, this is like this gentleman, this person there is not falling down. He's actually crawling. There are places where you'll have to crawl on all fours to go there. And they kept railings on both sides of the wall inside so that they can hold it and then can climb. Now, this is the kind of steep areas that you got, and people keep on going. And this is another view of the Great Wall of China. As you can see there, it is extremely steep, and still people keep on going through all this. And you can see there, it goes, keep on going for long distance. As I said, it's about 21,000 kilometers in length. And this is the map of the Great Wall of China. It starts somewhere in the eastern sea, that is near south, near Korea. It starts, or rather, it ends in Korea, starting from Mongolian border. And as I said, it's about 21,000 kilometers. Now, this is an important slide. I'll just take a minute of your time. You see, till the 16th century, that is 1600 and 1500, that is 1500 to 1600 is 16th century, when Akbar was ruling in India. Akbar died in the year 1605. He became emperor in 1556. He ruled over India for 49 years, one of the longest emperor apart from Aurangzeb. So in that time, both India and China were the wealthiest countries in the world. In fact, 50% of the world GDP was accounted by both China and India. And India was 30% of the world GDP. China had about 20% of the world's GDP, and the rest of the world, the balance. That was the wealth of India and China till 16th century. But after that, there was a big change. After that, you see the rising of Europe. Europe rose after that time. So this is called in economic history as the Great Divergence. It's called the Great Divergence. Now, Great Divergence means there has been there's a change in the world economic power. And from 16th century onwards, the rise of Europe. And it's called there are 4 or 5 elements of this. Now, these 3 lines I have mentioned here, on each there are so many books written. One is the age of exploration. As you know, 1458 or 1459 was Columbus had discovered the New World. He landed near Cuba, and that was the discovery of the Americas or the New World. And 1498, Vasco da Gama discovered a new route to India via Cape of Good Hope, and he landed in Calicut. And again, 1470s or 1480s, Magellan, again of Portugal, he circumvented the whole world. So it's called the age of exploration, opening up of the world sea routes. And that led to what is called mercantilism. Mercantilism is exporting more and more goods and then getting gold and silver in payment. Now, for the first time, gold and silver became much more available because of Spain and Portugal capturing or winning over, defeating South American countries like Peru, Brazil, Ecuador, Colombia, Argentina, and all that. Peru especially had a lot of gold and silver. Mexico also had a lot of silver. So all these countries were conquered by these 2 countries, that is Portugal and Spain. These are 2 small. Portugal had a population of today. Portugal has a population of just about 1.5 crores. But this is a country which had done a lot of pioneering work in seafaring and conquering new areas. The first people to land in India, as I said, was the Portuguese. After that, only the British, the Dutch, the French, all these people came later on. Then banking was developed again in 16th, 17th century by Dutch people. The concept of public limited company came with the Dutch people at that time itself. Then Britain, England had a lot of coal. So they had used coal, and that's how the steam was discovered or invented. And the steam engine, the first steam engine was invented sometime in end of 18th century rather, and that gave birth to ships being ships using these steam engines instead of depending upon sails and the winds and all that. So that changed the whole concept of trade. And the last day of 17th century, that is 1600, 31st December 1600, the British East India Company was formed. It was given a charter by Queen Elizabeth I. A few days before that, the Portuguese had established their East India Company. They didn't come much to India. They did come to Goa, but they mainly went to this area, that is Indonesia, that is today's Indonesia. They called it East Indies. They called it East Indies Company. That's why it's called East India Company. East India refers not to India, but refers to Indonesia, because that was the main pepper growing country in those days, apart from South India. Then came the Protestantism, that is Martin Luther's Protestantism, that is individual initiatives, that is commerce. You see, original Christianity had considered commerce and trade as a bad thing. Merchants cannot go to heaven. In fact, what the principle of Christianity was, a camel can go through the hole of a needle, but a merchant cannot go to heaven. That was the kind of concept they had. But that all got changed during Martin Luther's time. He said that individual initiatives are important and merchants are important and all that. And then there are small states. All these European states, they are small countries. England, Germany, Portugal, Spain, Italy, all these were small states. In fact, Italy was not a big country. It was city states. Venice and various other places, they were all city states. And then came the Industrial Revolution and then slave trade. Now, this is a very important thing. Much of the trade surplus of England and Spain and Portugal was created by slave trade, by capturing a lot of Africans. Something like 30 million Africans were converted into slaves and exported to New World, that is America, for cultivation of sugarcane and cotton. And that's where the trade surplus of the Western countries came colonialism, that is 19th century and even 20th century colonialism of especially Britain and Spain, Portugal. They were in South America, or rather Central America and South America. And Britain, of course, both the United States and India and Africa and many of these eastern countries like Malaysia, all that they had conquered, and that was the colonialism. Now, all these things are in great fascinating history of these countries have been given by this author by name Kenneth Pomeranz, and it's called The Great Divergence. It's worthwhile to read this book to know some 300 years of Asian history, also the European history, as to how the whole economic power changed from the east to the west because of these various inventions and colonialism and slave trade and all that. From 18th century onwards, Britain rules India, and China's opium wars. China was a humiliated country, and in fact, East India Company had exported opium from Bengal province. 1757 was the Battle of Palashi. Bengal province. Bengal province means in those days, Bengal was not only Bengal, today's West Bengal and Bangladesh, plus Bihar, plus parts of UP and Northeast and Orissa. So it was a big country by itself. Bengal was not just a province, though they called it province. It was a big country by itself. And the East India Company had the monopoly of Indians growing opium for British East India Company, and that was exported, or rather smuggled, to China. And Chinese were compelled means they became addicts, opium addicts. There is an excellent trilogy by Amitav Ghosh called Ibis Trilogy. It's actually 3 volumes. It's all about 18th, 19th century opium trade and British colonialism, opium war, all that between India and China, involving India and China, Hong Kong, all these areas. In fact, it's about 1,500 pages, 3-volume book. And in these days of COVID house arrest, it will be worthwhile for people to buy this book and to read from an Indian angle how it is written. It's a very nicely written book. It's called Ibis Trilogy. Ibis was the name of the ship which was constructed by a Parsi merchant in Bombay docks. And that ship actually takes opium. One of the ships takes opium from Calcutta port, Calcutta port to Hong Kong and China, and return journeys and all that. And what happens during those journeys is written very nicely in this what is called Ibis trilogy. It is worthwhile to read that. It's actually a novel which is written in a very nice manner. Now, India and China became independent. India became independent in 1947, and China's revolution was in 1949. And Nehru said, as you know, tryst with destiny, and Mao Zedong in 1949 said, China has stood up. In fact, he was very aggressive in his first Independence Day talk, unlike Pandit Nehru. Pandit Nehru was very polite and gentlemanly in giving his talk. Whereas Mao Zedong said China will take revenge against especially Britain, Western countries in general, but in particular Britain, because they had humiliated China by these opium wars. In fact, Hong Kong, it's called unequal treaties. Hong Kong was taken over by Britain for 150 years lease, and that lease expired only in 1997, as you know. After 1997, it became an independent. It became part of China, but still, as you know, at the time of 1997, when the treaty ended, again there was an agreement that the democratic institutions will be continued in Hong Kong, and there is a lot of confusion and then acrimony going on about that now. But it will be worthwhile to know this kind of background history. I'll go to the next one. Now, this is the rise of India and China after 1950. I'll take again 1 minute of your time. As you can see there, this shows the GDP of India, of various countries in what is called a nominal. That is, this is called GDP nominal, and GDP PPP means purchasing power parity. Now, normally you see these figures in all these IMF and World Bank publications. You get these GDP figures, and number one in GDP, as you know, is United States. This is about 2-year-old figure, $21 trillion. Trillion is 10 to the power of 9. That is 1,000 million is called 1,000 billion is called 1 trillion. So 21 trillion is the highest is United States, and China is number 2. Just 2 years back, they became number 2. And Japan is number 3, Germany number 4, India is number 5, and UK is number 6, and then Italy comes, and then various other countries. Now that is according to what is called a nominal. Nominal means according to the exchange rate, official exchange rate. Now $1, 1 US dollar equals 75 rupees. So at that rate, if you calculate, GDP of various countries is calculated in this manner, and China is number 2, India is number 5. Now, if there is another way of calculating which is more realistic, that is also done by IMF and the UNO and all that. And that is a purchasing power parity. That is, the exchange rate does not really give you the purchasing power parity. For instance, last year I had been to the United States. Both my sons are there in New York. They live in New Jersey. So I had gone for a haircut. That haircut cost me, that's not New York City, it's a suburban New Jersey. And they're in a small place. So there it cost me $10. That is a minimum for a standard haircut. $10 at the rate of 75 rupees is 750 rupees. Whereas in India, in Bangalore, when I go to the Bangalore club and have a haircut, all the facilities as you have got in New Jersey or New York are there in this Bangalore club saloon also. But I pay 110 rupees. So there is no comparison between 110 rupees and 750 rupees. So, and then 1 cup of coffee in Starbucks in New Jersey will cost you $3. $3 at 75 rupees is 225 rupees. But in India, in Bangalore or in Hyderabad, one cup of good coffee does not cost you 225 rupees. It will cost you about 60 rupees. In Bangalore, Darshini, you will get a good cup of coffee for 30 rupees even. So the real conversion rate is not the official rate of 75 rupees, but for India, it is about 35 rupees. That is what 35 rupees buys in India, $1 will buy in the United States. Same thing with China. What 40 rupees will buy in China, $1 will buy in the United States. So it's about 40% for China and 35% for India. That is at that rate, if we calculate the standard of living of the purchasing power is much more in our countries, that is in China as well as India. So at that rate, if you calculate purchasing power parity, that is PPP, today China is the number one in GDP. According to PPP calculation, they are reaching almost 30 trillion US dollars in GDP, whereas USA is only 21. The same thing as exchange rate. Their purchasing power is the same thing because it is US dollar. And number 3 is India. This is another important thing which you should realize. Though we are less than half GDP PPP terms in compared to China, it is still India is number 3, and then comes Japan, and then comes Germany, and then comes UK and all that. So number 1, China in PPP terms GDP. Number 2 is USA, and number 3 is India. Now this kind of comparison you won't find in either CNN or BBC, or even in our own Indian channels also. You won't find these things because we simply copy the Western countries' media, and then we don't go into the real facts of the reality of the situation. So I'll go to the next one. Now this is again an important slide where it compares both India and China. You see, though the area of China is 3 times more than India's, that is 9.6 compared to 3.3 of India. Most of China is consisting of deserts, that is this Gobi Desert and Taklamakan Desert. So 1/3 of their area is only actually under cultivation. In fact, the cultivable area of China is less than that of India. 360 million acre is under cultivation in India, whereas in China it's only 280 million acres. It's about 80 million acres less in China than in India. Only 12% of China's total geographical area is cultivated, whereas about 48% of nearly half of India's geographical area is cultivated. So that's the difference between India and China. Though their area is more, their cultivable area is less, which is the reason why they have leased a lot of land in Brazil, Ethiopia, Kenya, and these African countries. They have leased land. Their state companies have leased lands in these areas because Africa is vacant almost. Plenty of land is there. Brazil has got a lot of land. Brazil has got a lot of land, but very sparse population of hardly 12 crore people. So they have leased a lot of land to China, and China grows a lot of the soya beans, which is what is called a vegetarian protein. In India, we don't use soya bean much, but the Chinese use a lot of soya bean, and this soya bean is exported from the leased lands of China and Brazil and African countries back to China because they don't have much land. Now, population, India will exceed China's population in 2030 because India's net population growth rate is about 1.1%, whereas China is only 0.37. Our growth rate of population is 3 times growth rate of population, that is birth rate minus death rate is 3 times more than that of China, which is why we'll exceed China's population in 2030. Infant mortality in India is 3 times more than that of China. These are all statistics according to WHO, 2-year-old figures. Now also it would not have changed much. Maternal mortality, that is women after giving birth to child dying within 1 year is about 3 times or even 4.5 times more than that of China. Literacy rate in India is only 71 compared to 96 of China. Female literacy is 95% in China. Now this is an important thing. Urban population in India is only about 35-37% now, whereas China was already 61%, and they are developing about 100 cities of 1 million population. And by 2030, 70% of China's population will be living in cities, that is urban areas. That is how they have been making progress. Now, population below poverty line is another important calculation, which is done by both IMF and the World Bank, and then UN also, United Nations also. It's called Human Development Index. In that it comes. And below poverty line means below $2. What $2 per day income? There are 22% of India's population is below poverty line, whereas in China it is only 4% below poverty line. Now, this is another important slide where you can see China produces a little more than half of the world's steel for the past about 20 years now. And they produce 2/3 of the world's cement. And their installed capacity of electricity is about 1/4 of the world's. It's about 1,600 gigawatt. Now it has gone to about 2,000 gigawatt because every year they add about 10,000 megawatts. 10,000 megawatt is 1 gigawatt. Now you see India is about 730 gigawatts is our installed capacity. So they are about 2.5 to 3 times more than that of India. So similarly, on various of these things, they dominate. One of the things they dominate is actually what is called a rare earth. You find at the end this rare earth. Rare earth is needed for this 5G and all this information technology and all that. Now, China produces 71% of the world's rare earths. And another important thing I just, for your amusement, I took was this poultry eggs. Now, China produces and consumes 1/3 of the world's poultry eggs, which is again protein. Though only 1/6 of the world population is Chinese, 40% of the eggs are consumed by the Chinese. And they also have a lot of animal protein in the form of pork, which we don't consume much. Now the next one is...
Thank you everyone. The Knowledge Edge has no limits in the same way this session is. Will be brought to you in form of episodes. Episode 2 will be uploaded soon.